So Max Verstappen won the 2023 Formula One Spanish Grand Prix and extended his lead over Sergio Perez to 53 points. The race, in essence, it was interesting in bits. It was not the most excited race in Barcelona that we've seen over the years, but yeah, it had its moments. But here in this video, we are not here to talk about that. What we'll be doing in this video is rating the 20 drivers on how they performed over the Spanish GP weekend. So without further ado, let's get straight to it. Now let's start with Red Bull, and first of all, let's take a look at Max Verstappen. Now, what can we say about Max? Because, well, let's be fair. Of course, Red Bull is a grid beater. There is no doubt about it. That is the fastest car on the grid. However, there are moments in a race weekend where a driver can make a mistake and lose the advantage. Just for instance, take a look at what happened with Sergio Perez. Sergio Perez has had 3 races out of 7 where he has been eliminated before Q3, and that is entirely on him. What it also shows is that Red Bull, it might be the fastest car on the grid, but it's made to look more dominant in the hands of Max Verstappen. Let's be fair, the driver, he does not make any mistakes. He was flawless in qualifying, especially in tricky conditions where even Fernando Alonso made mistakes. Then if you talk about the race, there was no catching him. Overall, another flawless weekend, and he extends his championship lead to 53 points. And talking about the driver ratings, he gets a 10 out of 10 for the kind of weekend that he had in Barcelona. Now let's move to Sergio Perez. Talking about Sergio, it's safe to say that this was another disappointing weekend from the Mexican. Getting eliminated in Q2 in a Red Bull is poor, and getting eliminated before Q3 3 out of 7 times in this car is it's pathetic. You can't have that kind of qualifying record when you're driving a Red Bull, especially a car that is clearly heads and shoulders above everything else in F1. Yet again, Sergio messed up. In the race, yeah, he had a decent race. There's no doubt about it. He made decent progress and finished P4. But to understand where his performance stands in the scheme of things, you just need to look at the fact that George Russell started behind Sergio and he ended up finishing ahead of him. That too in a Mercedes that is arguably close to half a second slower than the Red Bull. It was a poor weekend from Sergio, and he gets a rating of 5 out of 10 for the Spanish Grand Prix. Now let's move to Ferrari and let's talk about Charles Leclerc. But first of all, I don't know what happened with him in qualifying. I think when Ferrari doesn't know, even until now, what went wrong with his car, because there was something that was clearly missing. Well, he had a Q1 elimination, a huge surprise, something that would not have happened if the car was working in proper condition. Again, in the race, I really don't know what to say because he could not even make it to the points. But there was also this factor where he was pitted after 15 laps on hard tires. That is questionable at best, but that is Ferrari doing Ferrari things. Overall, a weekend to forget for Charles Leclerc, and this season, I guess, other than Baku, where fortunately for him, he did not make too many mistakes, every other race has had something or the other happening to him. Honestly, one of the worst starts of the season for Leclerc since he made his debut, and I don't know if it gets better or worse, especially being a Ferrari driver. So yeah, when it comes to rating him, he gets a rating of 6 out of 10. Now talking about Carlos Sainz, and arguably one of the stronger weekends from him. His qualifying was pretty impressive. He placed the car on front row. Again in the race, he was limited by the machinery. Couldn't really do much. Had decent race pace and overall a decent weekend. But somewhere down the line, you feel if he had a more competitive machinery, he could have put up a better fight against the Mercedes drivers. Overall, a rating of 8 out of 10 for the Spaniard. Now talking about Lewis Hamilton, and overall a very strong weekend from his side. Yes, he could have done better in qualifying. In my view, he should have been on the front row because that was the kind of pace that he had shown earlier in the session. However, he made up for it in the race. He ultimately finished P2, his second P2 in the season. And it was a very impressive drive as well. It was very measured. And if you are keeping a close eye on how both the Mercedes drivers are performing in terms of race pace in that particular moment, you can see that Lewis has the edge in terms of a 10th or a 2 in Barcelona, and that is very impressive. So yes, a good way for Lewis to make a comeback of sorts after a stumbling start to the season. So yeah, in my view, he gets a rating of 9 out of 10, and it's nice to see him back on the podium. Now moving on to George Russell, and yeah, one of the main things that is a key takeaway from the race in Barcelona is the fact that Russell needs to stop making these mistakes. He's made quite a few this season, and once again in Barcelona, him not making the most of qualifying hurt him bad, because if his qualifying had been better, he could have possibly challenged Lewis and may have finished P2. Overall, it was a strong race from his side, But overall weekend, I think he needs some work to be done because you cannot compromise your qualifying too often. So yeah, in terms of rating, he gets a rating of 7.5 out of 10. Now moving to Alpine, and first of all, let's talk about Esteban Ocon. Now coming off the podium in Monaco, I feel the race was still, he maximized whatever was possible in the Alpine. He was arguably the quicker Alpine, except the final Q3 lap where Gasly was able to hook all the three sectors perfectly while Ocon made a mistake in his final sector. Yes, in the end he secured a P8. That was the maximum that was possible in that Alpine. But yeah, there's still some scope of improvement both from the team and the driver because I don't think Ocon nailed everything perfectly over the entire weekend. So yes, in terms of rating, he gets a rating of 8 out of 10. Now talking about Pierre Gasly and a weekend where he could have possibly done a lot more, especially with the kind of pace that he showed in qualifying, where he hooked up all the three sectors perfectly. Again, the impeding, it should come down to the team. The operations should be much better from the engineer. But yes, even to an extent, you could see that Gasly could have been more aware. He wasn't, and that hurt him badly. Even in the race, if he had a better start, maybe he could have done a bit better. But yes, overall he gets a point in Barcelona and a rating of 7.5 out of 10. Now moving on from Alpine, let's talk about McLaren. And first of all, for McLaren, let's talk about Lando Norris. Well, that qualifying session and that qualifying lap was perfect. And again, another reminder of how amazing results Lando Norris could produce if he had the car under him. Unfortunately, he does not right now, and that is a shame. Again, moving to the race and that mistake on the very first lap where he tapped Lewis and lost his front wing, that damaged his race. So yeah, a race weekend of two parts. One where Norris showed how impressive he can be in the right car, and another where he showed that maybe some little mistakes are happening on his side as well, which should not. Overall, a disappointing weekend for McLaren and for Norris, and he gets a rating of 6 out of 10. Now talking about Norris's teammate Oscar Piastri, and I think overall you can say that his weekend was decent in qualifying. He was there and thereabouts. He arguably made a mistake in his final lap and could not qualify better. In the race, he made a mistake early in the race, and in the end, the McLaren did not have the pace to do much better. Overall, I think I've been very impressed with Oscar Piastri, and I do feel McLaren made the right decision in picking him up. Overall, if I have to give a rating, I give him a rating of 7 out of 10. Impressive weekend from his side as well, and I'm once again I'll say the same thing. I'm keeping a keen eye on how Oscar progresses in the future. Next up, we move to Alfa Romeo, and first of all, Valtteri Bottas. Well, Valtteri had a shocker of a weekend in Barcelona, and I don't really know what happened. I don't even know if Bottas knows what really went wrong. To be honest, it does appear that Bottas has taken his eye off the ball to an extent. He's enjoying things outside the track, and they might have played a role in affecting his performance on the track. I'm not sure, but this season it does appear to be the case because he has been doing a lot of things off the track, and I'm not sure if it plays a role, but it certainly does not benefit his driving. Overall, a poor qualifying session, a poor race, and there needs to be a few questions over how serious Bottas is when it comes to his career. Because if he isn't, Alfa Romeo or in future Audi, they need to keep an eye on possible replacements in the team. In terms of rating his Spanish GP weekend, I give him a rating of 2 out of 10. Now talking about Zhou Guanyu, and a very, very impressive weekend from Zhou because, well, overall in the qualifying, he did a decent job. He out-qualified Bottas. In the race, he was very impressive because the entire race, you could see that he had the performance to produce the results. But the most important part was the racecraft. Throughout the race, he battled with Yuki Tsunoda and Nico Hülkenberg, and he did that ably. There was no evidence of Joe being out of depth, to be honest. He belonged in that particular group, and that is very impressive. Overall, this was one of, if not the best race weekends of his F1 career until now. And in my view, he gets a rating of 8 out of 10. Now after Alfa Romeo, let's talk about Aston Martin. And first of all, at Aston Martin, let's talk about Fernando Alonso. Well, an off weekend for Fernando Alonso. We had forgotten if something like this even existed. But overall, a poor qualifying in my view. He should have been higher up. He damaged his floor, and he should not be doing that. Someone of his driving caliber should not be making those mistakes. Well, he did. Then, even in the race, I do not appreciate the whole Lance Stroll, Alonso dynamics, whatever is going on there. Just being as frank as possible. That's something I do not appreciate, and that's something I'm not a huge fan of. Having said that, even then, the race performance was not really up to the mark. It was only in the final stint that Alonso was able to close up on Lance. He could not do it earlier in the race. So, yeah, overall, a disappointing and an off weekend for Alonso, that too in his home race. Who would have thought? But yeah, this is how the cookie crumbles sometimes. In my view, he gets a rating of 6 out of 10 for the Spanish Grand Prix. Now coming to Lance Stroll, and I think we should appreciate a very meaningful, steady, level-headed race weekend that was executed by Lance. There's no doubts about it that he is under pressure. There's no doubt about it that Alonso's aura and his pace and experience, it does put a lot more pressure on teammates, and maybe some of it has been there on Stroll as well. However, pretty strong in qualifying, did a good job in race as well, and somewhat he should use this performance as a launchpad for producing more consistent results. If I can continue to do that, there will be no one asking questions for his seat. Now, when it comes to rating his weekend, he gets a rating of 8 out of 10 in my view. Now, after Aston Martin, let's take a look at Haas. And first of all, for Haas, let's take a look at Kevin Magnussen. Well, it was a poor qualifying session. Him getting eliminated in Q1 when his teammate was, I think, P7 or P8 in Q3. That shows the gulf in performance between the two drivers, and that should not be there. The race was, well, Haas did not have the race pace to compete anyway. So at the end of the day, he ended up where he started to an extent. There wasn't much difference in his starting and ending grid position. And overall, a disappointing weekend. In my view, he gets a rating of 5 out of 10 for the Spanish Grand Prix. Now talking about Nico Hülkenberg, and it was basically a tale of two halves. And compared to Lando Norris, who had a spectacular qualifying and a poor race, in case of Hülkenberg, it was more a case of the car not having the pace to do anything. He started inside top 10 and finished, I think, P14 or P15. And all of it was because the car could not keep its tires alive. So yes, overall, he would be disappointed, but he would also be happy as well, because somewhere down the line, he's proving that he's still got the pace to produce the kind of results that he's producing in qualifying right now. Put him in the right car and he'll be able to produce better results. Overall, he gets a rating of 7.5 out of 10 for the Spanish Grand Prix. Now moving on from Haas to AlphaTauri, and first of all, let's take a look at Yuki Tsunoda. Now talking about Yuki Tsunoda, well, he got out-qualified by De Vries, and well, now it's twice in a row that this has happened, so a bit of a surprise. But yes, in the race, he set the record straight. He was, I think, close to 30 to 35 seconds ahead of De Vries at one point. When you're able to produce that kind of a gap, I mean, it just shows the gulf in performance between the two drivers, and pretty impressive as well overall from Tsunoda, because his racecraft, just like Joe Guan Yu, his racecraft was very impressive and he deserved points again. The penalty was, in my view, it didn't really make sense. It's hard to say why he got the penalty, because it was a marginal call, to be honest. But yes, having said that, the entire race, he was challenging the Alpine of Esteban Ocon for a while, and you could see that the car is strong, and even the driver, he has made improvements over the last couple of years. So yeah, overall, if I have to give a rating of 7.5 out of 10. Now moving to Nick De Vries, and well, now it is a tale of two parts, to be honest. On one side, we have Nick De Vries out qualifying Yuki second time in a row, so that is impressive. But in the race, he still does not have the pace or the racecraft of Yuki to ultimately hang in with the upper midfield drivers. So that is something he needs to work on. Overall, there are still steps of improvements that De Vries is making. Will they be enough for him to keep the seat for the next season? I don't know. But at least for now, he seems to be doing a decent enough job. Overall, he still gets a rating of 6 out of 10, because you should not be around 20 to 30 seconds behind your teammate. Now moving to Williams, first of all, let's talk about Alex Albon. Well, in my view, he did the best that he could with that car. Yeah, that the floor of the Williams, it made quite a lot of news, but to be honest, it is expected. It is arguably the slowest car on the grid, and in the slowest car, you expect that kind of a floor anyways. Having said that, Albon did what he could with that car, to be honest. There wasn't really much on offer, and in my view, he gets a rating of 7 out of 10 for the race in Barcelona. Now let's talk about Logan Sargent. Well, Logan needs to stop crashing. Let's be very honest. The driver is crashing far too much. he was last in qualifying and last in the race. Why? Because even though he has the pace, he is not able to put everything together. After a point, this is going to become an issue, especially because while Logan is not even producing the results, he's crashing the car far too much, and that is costing Williams money. If this continues, Williams might have second thoughts of continuing with Logan beyond this season. So yes, in my view, he gets a rating of 5 out of 10 for the Spanish Grand Prix. Okay, so now that we are done with the entire grid, let's take a look at the driver ratings for Barcelona. As we can see here, Max Verstappen got a 10, arguably the best rating in the entire grid. But yeah, Valtteri Bottas had one of the worst weekends of the entire season. And yeah, other than that, you see Lewis Hamilton being the standout performer. And yeah, drivers like Charles Leclerc, Lando Norris, they did not have the perfect weekend. Now, since we're done with the driver ratings of Barcelona, let's look at arguably the most interesting part. Let's take a look at the cumulative ratings after the first 7 races. Now, for me, this is arguably the most interesting part and one of the reasons why I do these driver rankings, because this helps me keep a track on how every driver has been performing this season. Now, in my view, in top 8, most of the names are not much of a surprise. Max is expected, Alonso is expected. I do feel Yuki Tsunoda is a big surprise. I also feel that Esteban Ocon ranking higher than Norris and Leclerc, and even Sergio Perez is a surprise. But yes, in top 8, more or less these drivers have been very consistent. Now what we can also see is that Lewis is starting to make his way up the rankings. He is now in P5 and is closing in on George Russell, his teammate. Now, going lower down the order, what is arguably a bit more surprising is how Carlos Sainz is at 13th. Arguably, the biggest surprise, at least for me, is that Valtteri Bottas is at 20th right now. He is below Logan Sargent, Nick De Vries, Lance Stroll, and that is a huge surprise. Arguably, Bottas and his driving, it has suffered this season, and maybe it is because he has been having a bit fun. He is arguably a bit distracted, and it has trickled down in his performances as well, which have not been as up to the mark as they tend to be. So yes, arguably one of the biggest surprise for me tends to be where Valtteri Bottas finds himself at the bottom of the order. Having said that, these are my driver rankings. What do you guys think? How do you think you will rank these drivers after the race in Barcelona? What's your take? Do let me know in the comment section. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you next time.